You're watching Byline Wilmington on CBS 10 WILM. Here's your host, Don Ansell.
Go ahead.
Our guest, Alfred Schnag. He was 7 when the Nazis started herding Jews into concentration camps. He and his family escaped. We're talking about a night in November 1938. That was called the Night of Broken Glass. And if you're just joining us, Alfred is telling us what happened that night. So your parents woke you up. You're looking out the window.
We're looking out of the window, right in between the opening of the drapes, and we're seeing what's happening below on the street. Now, the street was, there were a lot of shops on the street, many of them owned by Jewish shopkeepers, the high-end shopkeepers, the ones that sold china and crystal and those beautiful things that you see in the store windows. And what we saw were the brown shirts, the SA, the paramilitary forces, and a lot of youth, Nazi youth, and they were throwing bricks into the windows of the shops. And as the windows shattered, they would climb into the store windows, and they would throw the merchandise that they saw in the store out on the street, and it would shatter on the cobblestone street.
And this is a night that is, I mean, it's a historic moment in the world now.
Most certainly is. And
this was happening in Cologne.
It was happening in Cologne. We didn't know it at the time, but it happened all over in every city in Germany. It was an orchestrated pogrom.
Pogrom. In addition, they beat, raped, and arrested Jews across Germany.
They did. We didn't know that as we were watching, but all we saw was this tremendous joy on the part of these Nazis as they were throwing this merchandise out on the street.
And you remember,
creating
this
that
is a vivid memory of...
Extremely vivid. My parents stood over us and they said, "Boys, never forget what you see here tonight." Never have.
I had read that, your mother's quote, "Boys, what you see here, don't you ever forget it."
That's correct.
Why do you think she said that?
Well, they knew what was happening in Germany, and they wanted us to remember it. They knew the import of it, how important it was, and how we were hated, and they wanted us to carry that with us, probably for the rest of our lives, and I certainly have.
Yeah. So you eventually, because of your father had seen what the environment was going to be, he made plans, and you got out of Germany, went to Holland, and eventually
came to the States. That's correct.
The United States.
Right.
And what year did you were what, 9 when you got here?
I was, well, we arrived here in 1940. I was 9 years old. On April 1st, 1940, we sailed past the Statue of Liberty and arrived in the United States. And of course, this was the dream of everybody, was to come to America.
Do you remember sailing into the harbor?
Oh, sure.
You do?
Absolutely.
And seeing the Statue of Liberty?
Absolutely.
What were what did you feel?
Well, it was a new adventure. This was now a place we had to relearn. We had to learn another language. We did not speak English.
You spoke German?
We spoke German, and I spoke Dutch because we had been in Holland for a year and a half.
How did you finance, where did the money come from for you to go from Germany to Holland to the United States?
My father had saved the money from his earnings, and they weren't by any means rich people, but that whatever they had accumulated, it was enough to bring us over here. And he had a position, again, with the same company that
when he
came
to America.
Yeah, when he was in Germany.
So he had a job to go to.
Did have a job.
And where did you go to live?
We lived in New York City.
Like Manhattan?
In the Whitehall Hotel on Broadway.
Really?
In New York for the first 2 or 3 months that we arrived.
How hard was it to learn the language?
Well, we went to school immediately. My parents put us into the public schools in New York City.
Without language skill?
Without the language skill. But, you know, it's interesting. From German to Dutch, we had learned Dutch. We were fluent in that. And Dutch has so much English in the language, that we could pick up a word here or there and knew what was going on. And of course our math skills were quite good, so we were good at that, but we couldn't communicate with our classmates. And until that summer, when my parents sent my brother and I to a summer camp, a Y camp, by the way, we
That's
did
when
not
your
really
language
speak.
got...
And then we were in bunks with other American kids, and within 2 weeks or less, my parents came up to visit us and wanted to know how we were doing, and the counselor said, "What do you mean? They don't speak English. They're perfect in English. They get along very well with everyone." So in that very short period of time, we had acquired an ability to understand and speak the language.
But you, obviously, all of your family didn't come over. You had relatives that perished.
Yes, we did.
In the concentration camps.
Absolutely. When we were in Holland, my parents were still able, in 1939, to get my grandparents and my aunt out of Cologne, and they moved to Amsterdam. They lived only about 4 or 5 blocks from where we lived in Amsterdam. My brother and I used to go over and see them every day. We'd ride our bicycles over there. When we left Holland and arrived in the United States on April 1st, only 35 days after we arrived here in the United States, the Nazis overran Holland, violated their neutrality, and took over that country. We had hoped to have our grandparents follow us to America, but it was impossible at that time, no longer possible.
Were they taken to concentration camps?
They were eventually taken to Sobibor and were gassed and died there.
When did you find out?
We didn't learn about that until pretty close to the end of the war. We had been notified, I think by the Red Cross, or information came to us via the Red Cross, that grandparents had died of heart attacks. And that was the thing. The Germans announced through the Red Cross, everybody died of a heart attack. Well, of course, they were gassed, they were shot, they were just brutalized, and unfortunately, my grandparents also were gassed, probably right in the train that took them to the concentration camp.
We'll come back. There are governments and regimes now that deny the Holocaust happened. We'll ask Alfred what he thinks about that when we come back. Stay with us.